Hello everyone. I'm here today to share with you one of the most touching stories I've ever researched. This is the story of Diana and John, two souls who dared to love in a time when that love was considered the greatest of all crimes. It's a story of separation, hope, and a search that lasted 10 long years. I really hope this narrative touches your heart the way it touched mine. Now, before we begin, I want to be transparent with you. This narrative is fictionalized. The characters and their names are not real people. But here's what is real. Every event, every situation you're about to hear was a common occurrence during American slavery. These practices were documented extensively in historical records and survivor testimonies. Forbidden romances between enslaved people and plantation owners' children happened more frequently than we imagine, and the brutal separations that followed were tragically real. Plantation records, personal letters, and court documents from the era confirm these patterns. So while the names are invented, the experiences were tragically real for thousands of people who lived through this dark period of American history. Now let me take you back to the spring of 1843, to Riverside Plantation in Virginia, where this extraordinary story begins. In the spring of 1843, on Riverside Plantation in Virginia, a love so forbidden emerged that it would tear apart a family, separate two souls, and set in motion a search that would last an entire decade. No one could have imagined that the colonel's son would fall in love with an enslaved woman, and even less that he would spend 10 years searching for her. Diana was 22 years old in the summer of 1843. She had been born on Riverside Plantation, the daughter of Sarah, who worked in the big house as a seamstress. Diana had inherited her mother's delicate hands and talent for sewing, and from the age of 15, she too had been assigned to work inside the mansion, mending clothes, embroidering linens, and helping with the household tasks that kept the colonel's family comfortable. Colonel William Harrington was a stern man, known throughout Virginia for his iron discipline and his prosperous tobacco plantation. He had built his fortune over 30 years, acquiring more land, more enslaved people, and more influence with each passing season. His wife, Margaret, was a cold woman who rarely spoke to the enslaved people except to give orders. But their son, John, was different. John Harrington was 25 years old in 1843. He had been sent to study in Boston for 4 years, where he had been exposed to abolitionist ideas and different ways of thinking about the world. When he returned to Riverside Plantation in early 1843, he came back changed. He no longer saw the plantation the way his father did. He questioned, he observed, and he noticed Diana. It started with simple glances. Diana would be sewing in the corner of the drawing room, her fingers moving swiftly through the fabric, and John would find himself watching her. There was something about her quiet dignity, the way she carried herself despite her circumstances, that captivated him. She had dark, intelligent eyes and a grace that seemed to transcend her situation. One afternoon in April, John found Diana alone in the sewing room, struggling with a particularly difficult piece of embroidery for his mother's dress. "May I help?" he asked softly. Diana looked up, startled. It was unusual for the master's son to speak directly to her. "Sir, I can manage, thank you. I learned some needlework in Boston," John said with a small smile. "A friend's sister taught me. Please let me show you a technique that might help." That afternoon marked the beginning of everything. John began finding excuses to visit the sewing room. At first they barely spoke, but gradually conversations emerged. He told her about Boston, about the books he had read, about ideas of freedom and equality. She told him about her dreams, about the mother she had lost 2 years earlier, about the small moments of beauty she found in her daily life, a sunrise, a bird's song, the satisfaction of completing a perfect stitch. By June, they had fallen deeply in love. It was a love that defied every rule, every social convention, every law of their time. They knew it was dangerous. They knew the consequences would be severe if discovered. But love, true love, does not ask for permission. They met in secret, late at night in the old tobacco barn on the far edge of the property. Diana would slip out of the slave quarters after everyone was asleep, and John would leave the big house through the back door. In those stolen moments, they were just two people, not master's son and enslaved woman, but simply John and Diana, two souls who had found each other against all odds. "I'll find a way," John whispered to her one night in July, holding her hands. "I'll convince my father to let me buy your freedom. We'll go north to Boston, we'll marry, we'll build a life together." Diana wanted to believe him, but she had lived her entire life on the plantation. She knew the Colonel. She knew his pride, his rigidity, his absolute belief in the social order. "John, your father will never allow it. Never." "Then we'll run away," John said desperately. "We'll leave everything behind. I don't care about the plantation, the money, any of it. I only care about you." But they waited too long. They should have run when they had the chance. On the night of August 15th, 1843, Colonel Harrington discovered everything. He had been suspicious of his son's behavior for weeks, the way John seemed distracted, the way he disappeared at odd hours. That night, the Colonel followed John to the tobacco barn and found him with Diana, holding her in his arms, kissing her. The Colonel's rage was volcanic. He dragged John back to the house while two overseers seized Diana. What happened in the big house that night? The neighbors could hear the Colonel shouting from half a mile away. He called John a disgrace, a traitor to his race, to his family, to everything the Harringtons stood for. "You will never see that woman again," the Colonel thundered. "I will sell her tomorrow morning and you will forget this madness ever happened." John fought. He pleaded. He threatened to leave, but the Colonel was unmovable. "If you leave this house, you leave with nothing. No money, no inheritance, nothing. And I will make sure every plantation owner in Virginia knows what you did. You'll be shunned by society. You'll have no way to buy her freedom. No way to help her at all. If you truly care about her, you'll stay here and let her go, because if you try to follow her, I'll make sure her life becomes even worse than it already is." It was the cruelest choice imaginable, but the Colonel had calculated perfectly. John was trapped. If he ran away with nothing, he couldn't protect Diana, couldn't buy her freedom, couldn't give her any kind of life. The Colonel held all the power and he knew it. The next morning, Diana was sold to a slave trader who was passing through Virginia on his way south. She was chained with 15 other people and marched away from Riverside Plantation. John watched from his bedroom window, tears streaming down his face as the woman he loved disappeared down the dusty road. He never even got to say goodbye. The years that followed were the darkest of John's life. His father watched him constantly, controlling every aspect of his existence. The Colonel made John work directly on the plantation, overseeing the fields, managing the accounts, learning every aspect of the business. It was both punishment and preparation. The Colonel was grooming John to take over, but he was also making sure his son had no freedom, no privacy, no opportunity to search for Diana. John tried once in the spring of 1844 to hire a private investigator to find her. The Colonel discovered it within a week and destroyed every lead. "I told you," the Colonel said coldly. "You will forget her, or I will make sure she suffers for your stubbornness." So John waited. He played the obedient son. He worked the plantation. He attended social gatherings and smiled at the daughters of other plantation owners his father paraded before him. But inside, he never stopped thinking about Diana. Every night, he wondered where she was, if she was safe, if she thought of him. He kept a small piece of embroidery she had made, a handkerchief with her initials carefully stitched in the corner. It was the only piece of her he had left, and he kept it hidden in a locked drawer, taking it out only when he was alone. The Colonel died suddenly in November of 1850, 7 years after he had separated John and Diana. He suffered a stroke while inspecting the tobacco fields and died 3 days later. John was 32 years old, and for the first time since that terrible August night in 1843, he was free. He inherited everything: Riverside Plantation, 3 other properties, considerable wealth, and complete control over his own life. The funeral was barely over before John began his search, but finding Diana proved far more difficult than he had imagined. The slave trader who had bought her in 1843 had died in 1846, and his records were scattered and incomplete. John hired investigators. He traveled throughout the South, visiting plantation after plantation, describing Diana, asking questions, following any lead no matter how slim. Months turned into a year turned into 2. John refused to give up. He sold 2 of the properties he had inherited, keeping only Riverside and 1 other. and used the money to fund his search. He placed advertisements in newspapers across the South. He contacted abolitionists in the North, asking for their help in locating her. When I researched this part of the story, I couldn't help but wonder what kept him going. 10 years is a long time to search for someone with no guarantee you'll ever find them. But true love, I've learned, has a persistence that defies logic. In the spring of 1853, 10 years after they had been separated, John finally got the lead he had been praying for. A former overseer from a plantation in Mississippi contacted him, saying he remembered a woman named Diana, who matched John's description. She had been purchased by a plantation owner named Thomas Blackwell in late 1843 and had been working on his cotton plantation ever since. John left for Mississippi immediately. He traveled for 5 days, barely stopping to rest, driven by a hope that felt almost painful in its intensity. When he arrived at Blackwell Plantation, he could barely breathe. He met with Thomas Blackwell and made an offer to purchase Diana. Blackwell was surprised. It was unusual for someone to travel so far to buy a specific enslaved person, but John offered 3 times her value and Blackwell agreed. When Diana was brought to the main house, she didn't recognize John at first. 10 years had aged him. His face was thinner, his eyes carried a weight they hadn't before, and his hair was beginning to gray at the temples. But then he spoke. "Diana," he said softly, and his voice hadn't changed. She stared at him, her eyes widening in disbelief. "John?" Her voice was barely a whisper. "Is it really you?" "I told you I would find you," John said, tears streaming down his face. "I'm sorry it took so long. I'm so sorry." Diana couldn't speak. 10 years of pain, of believing she would never see him again, of surviving each day in a place far from everything she had known, all of it came crashing down. She collapsed into his arms, sobbing. John completed the transaction that day. He bought Diana's freedom, signed all the necessary papers, and they left Mississippi together. But John didn't take her back to Virginia. He had already made plans. They traveled north, crossing into free territory, and in the summer of 1853, in a small church in Pennsylvania, John and Diana were married. They settled in Philadelphia, where John used what remained of his inheritance to open a textile business. Diana's skills in sewing, the same skills that had first brought them together, became the foundation of their livelihood. They lived modestly but happily, finally free to be together without fear. In 1854, they had their first child, a daughter they named Sarah, after Diana's mother. 2 years later, a son named William. They built the life they had dreamed of that summer night in 1843, a life of love, dignity, and freedom. John never returned to Riverside Plantation. He sold it in 1855 and used the money to support their family and to help other formerly enslaved people establish themselves in Philadelphia. He had chosen love over inheritance, freedom over tradition, and he never regretted it for a single day. Diana lived until 1889, dying peacefully at the age of 68, surrounded by her children, grandchildren, and the man who had searched for her for 10 years. John died 6 months later, his heart broken by her absence. They were buried side by side in a small cemetery in Philadelphia, their headstones bearing a simple inscription, "Love conquers all." Their story is a reminder that even in the darkest periods of history, even in a system designed to dehumanize and destroy, love could survive. Not every story from that era ended happily, most didn't, but Diana and John's story shows us that sometimes, against all odds, love finds a way. This story really moved me when I put it together. The idea that someone would spend 10 years searching for the person they love, never giving up hope, is something that stays with you. If this narrative touched you as much as it touched me, please leave your like on this video. It really helps me continue bringing these stories to you. Now I want to ask you something. Do you know any similar stories? Maybe from your own family history or from your region? Stories of forbidden love, of people who fought against the system, of separations and reunions. I'd love to hear about them in the comments below. These stories need to be remembered and shared. And please, tell me where you're watching this from. What city? What state? What country are you in right now? What time is it there as you watch this? I love knowing that these stories are reaching people all over the world. connecting us through shared history and shared humanity. Thank you so much for being here with me today. If you're not subscribed yet, please subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next stories. Give this video a thumbs up if it moved you, and share it with someone who appreciates powerful historical narratives. A big hug to all of you, and I'll see you in the next video. Take care.